As Nazi Germany's panzer divisions tore across France in the spring of 1940, a peculiar British machine began its service, so unassuming that the German soldiers who first captured one dismissed it as a joke. It wasn't a tank, lacking a turret and heavy armor. It wasn't a truck, running on tracks instead of wheels. It was a small, open-topped box powered by a commercial car engine, so compact a person could nearly embrace its hull. The Wehrmacht officers who inspected the initial captured models were amused. One report details a German tank commander dismounting, walking to an abandoned carrier and striking its side with his boot, questioning if it was even a real military vehicle. He labeled it a plaything. He was mistaken. That insignificant machine was destined to become the most produced armored fighting vehicle in all of military history, serving longer than the tanks it supported, moving faster than the half-tracks it competed with, and fighting on every major battlefront of the Second World War. From the arid deserts of North Africa to the frigid landscapes of the Eastern Front, from the dense jungles of Southeast Asia to the chaotic shores of Normandy, more than 113,000 units would be manufactured. No armored vehicle before or since has ever approached that figure. And its story began with a British military uncertain of its needs, and a single visionary engineer who built the solution anyway. To grasp the reason for the universal carrier's existence, one must first comprehend a persistent issue in infantry combat since the advent of the machine gun. The soldier on foot is exceptionally adaptable. He can navigate terrain, climb obstacles, and traverse gaps completely impassable to any vehicle. But he's also slow, vulnerable, and fatigues easily. During the 1930s, the British Army analyzed conflicts in Spain and Abyssinia, reaching a grim realization. How could infantry squads cross open, bullet-swept ground without being decimated? They required a method to transport their heavy support weapons forward, ensuring the crews weren't exhausted before engaging the enemy. A proper tank, however, was costly, mechanically intricate, and an inefficient use of resources for this specific duty. What was really needed was something smaller and far simpler. They needed a vehicle that could be mass-produced in staggering quantities and operated by an average soldier with only a week of instruction. The individual who best fulfilled this need was John Valentine Carden, a British engineer possessing a unique talent for creating tracked vehicles that were practical, economical, and swift enough to be truly effective. Carden had dedicated the 1920s and early 1930s to developing light tankettes and carriers for the famed British armaments firm Vickers. He approached the challenge of infantry support from a purely engineering perspective, and his conclusion was revolutionary for the era. You didn't require armor capable of stopping an artillery round. What you needed was armor sufficient to deflect rifle bullets and shrapnel, paired with a vehicle that was low to the ground and agile enough to dash across exposed terrain before the enemy could target it with heavier armaments. His concepts evolved through multiple versions in the mid-1930s. The Bren Carrier, the Scout Carrier, and the Cavalry Carrier were all born from this experimental phase. Each model was slightly distinct, tailored to address a unique tactical requirement. But the British military leadership repeatedly faced the same difficult truth. Managing 3 or 4 separate carrier types, each for a specialized function, was creating a logistical nightmare of spare parts and training protocols. In 1938, the War Office made a pivotal choice. They greenlit a single, standardized vehicle designed to perform every job simultaneously. They named it the Universal Carrier. The resulting design was brilliantly straightforward. Its hull was constructed from rolled, homogeneous steel plates, measuring between 7 and 10 millimeters at the thickest sections. By tank standards, this was unimpressive. A contemporary German Panzer III boasted armor up to 30 millimeters thick. But the Universal Carrier was never intended for tank-on-tank combat. Its steel was adequate to halt rifle shots at typical engagement distances, deflect non-armor-piercing machine gun fire, and shield the crew from the explosive fragments and general pandemonium of battle. The hull was short, standing just 1.5 meters high, meaning it presented a very small target while on the move. Its completely open top might seem like a disastrous vulnerability, but it served 2 critical functions. It reduced weight, which directly improved speed and fuel economy, and it provided the crew with a panoramic view of their surroundings that no enclosed vehicle could ever hope to match. Power came from a Ford V8 Flathead, a commercial automotive power plant displacing just under 4 liters and generating 85 horsepower. This was not a purpose-built military engine, and that was a deliberate, strategic choice. Ford was already producing millions of these engines for its civilian cars. The factories were ready, the tooling was paid for, and replacement parts were readily available across the globe. By using a proven civilian engine, British designers guaranteed that a Ford dealership in Canada, Australia, or any Commonwealth nation could, in theory, service a Carrier's engine. Was this laziness? No, it was strategic genius. Top speed on paved roads was about 30 miles per hour, which seems modest today, but 10 times the marching speed of infantry and faster than many support vehicles of that time. Off-road, its Horstman suspension system delivered an unexpectedly smooth ride for a vehicle so small. The Horstman design utilized coil spring bogies mounted on the exterior of the hull, a system that absorbed terrain irregularities with remarkable efficiency, keeping the tracks in firm contact with the ground even on steep or broken surfaces. Drivers often described it as intuitive to handle, far less demanding than heavier tracked machines that required considerable physical strength to steer. Steering was managed by a combination of track braking and a controlled differential, not the simple clutch and brake systems of larger tanks, which made turns both precise and nearly effortless. The vehicle accommodated a crew of 2 or 3, depending on its designated role for the day, seated in a low compartment divided into 3 sections by a central engine bay. This unorthodox layout placed the driver and commander on one side, with space for another crewman or equipment on the other. It appeared strange. Engineers reviewing the initial blueprints sometimes questioned if the arrangement was an error. It was not. It was the product of meticulously balancing the engine's weight against the crew's position to maintain the lowest possible center of gravity. Standard armament was a single Bren light machine gun, which is how the vehicle earned its most common nickname, the Bren Carrier. The Bren was a fantastic weapon, a Czech design chambered for .303 British ammunition, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute from a 30-round magazine. It was dependable, accurate, and simple enough for soldiers to disassemble and maintain even under fire. Mounted on the Carrier, it provided the power fire of an infantry section's main support weapon, all while keeping the crew safe from small arms fire. But the vehicle's brilliance lay in its adaptability for nearly any task the Army could devise. Remove the Bren gun, and you could install a boy's anti-tank rifle, a weapon that fired a huge .55 caliber round capable of penetrating the armor of lighter enemy tanks. Swap the boy's rifle for a 2-inch mortar, and the tiny machine transformed into a mobile indirect fire support unit. Fitted with a Piat anti-tank launcher, and the tiny machine could challenge medium tanks at close quarters. Fill the rear compartment with ammunition, and it became a battlefield taxi for vital supplies. Mount a stretcher frame, and it converted into an ambulance that could retrieve wounded soldiers from areas under fire that would stop any wheeled vehicle cold. Or strip everything out to turn it into a signal vehicle, carrying radios to forward positions a Jeep could never reach. The Carrier was, in the purest meaning of the word, universal. The Wasp variant pushed this adaptability to its most terrifying conclusion. Technicians replaced the standard weaponry with a Ronson flamethrower system that could hurl a jet of ignited fuel over 90 feet. The Wasp was created specifically to assault prepared enemy defenses, the dug-in bunkers and fortified buildings that inflicted massive casualties on attacking infantry. Fire, unlike a bullet, doesn't need a direct line of sight. It pours around corners, seeps into openings, and fills gaps in fortifications. It attacks the will to fight as much as the flesh. And during the brutal close-quarters combat of 1944, this psychological impact was as tactically important as the physical ruin it caused. Wasp carriers would demonstrate their immense value in the hedgerow country of Normandy, where German defenders could pin down an entire infantry company for hours with just a single machine gun nest. A Wasp could resolve that situation in seconds. But All that was yet to come when the Universal Carrier first saw major action in the summer of 1940. The Battle of France was a comprehensive disaster for the British military. The Germans had outmaneuvered Allied defensive strategies, breaking through the Ardennes with concentrated armored forces, and in a matter of days, they had severed the British Expeditionary Forces' supply and retreat routes. The British withdrawal to Dunkirk was an incredible feat of desperate improvisation, and the Universal Carrier played a part in it that is often overlooked in popular histories. As British units fell back, carriers loaded with ammunition raced forward to resupply them, providing the bullets and mortar rounds that enabled rear guards to hold the line. They evacuated wounded men from positions unreachable by wheeled transport amidst the chaos. They ferried signals equipment, allowing commanders to maintain a semblance of control in a rapidly deteriorating situation. Carriers fought alongside infantry in delaying actions, their Bren guns suppressing German advances while soldiers retreated to the beaches. Hundreds were left behind at Dunkirk, scuttled or abandoned. The Germans gathered them with professional curiosity, and here, the narrative takes a fascinating turn. The Wehrmacht had no qualms about using captured enemy equipment, and the Universal Carrier quickly proved its worth. German engineers studied the vehicles and reached the same conclusion that it escaped their field commanders who had mocked them. The Carrier was simple, dependable, and could be maintained with common mechanical skills. German units on the Eastern Front began using captured carriers as supply and ammunition transports almost immediately. In several documented instances, German technicians modified them even further, mounting small artillery and anti-tank guns on the chassis in ways the original British designers never envisioned. Photographs from the Eastern Front show Universal Carriers with German military markings, their crews having added improvised armor plating and unique weapon mounts, giving the vehicle a character distinct from its British origins. The Germans even gave it an official designation, the Bren Carrier 731E. They continued to use them until the captured vehicles simply wore out, which for some units wasn't until 1943 or even later. Meanwhile, back in Britain, production was accelerating at a rate that pre-war planners could have never foreseen. The initial contracts were for modest quantities, but as the true scale of the global conflict became apparent, and as requests for more carriers poured in from every theater, the manufacturing effort expanded dramatically. British factories began producing carriers around the clock, yet Britain alone couldn't meet the overwhelming demand. So, production was distributed across the Commonwealth, in a move that showcased the brilliance of the decision to use civilian parts. Canada transformed into a manufacturing titan, its factories producing carriers that were mechanically identical to their British counterparts because they used the same Ford engine and familiar industrial components. Australia and New Zealand also joined the effort. Each dominion built carriers to the same fundamental design, with minor local variations, but all sharing the same core mechanical identity. This distributed network meant that even if German bombs had wiped out every British carrier factory, the supply of vehicles would have continued unabated from Commonwealth plants. It was resilience engineered into the very supply chain. In North Africa, the Universal Carrier discovered a role that elevated it from a mere transport to a genuine combat machine. The Western Desert presented a unique set of conditions that were both harsh on vehicles and perfectly suited to the carrier's specific strengths. The ground was generally firm, allowing the tracks to grip without getting bogged down. The vast, open terrain made the carrier's low silhouette a significant tactical benefit, and the immense distances made its speed and fuel efficiency invaluable. Carriers with the 7th Armored Division, the Desert Rats, scouted far ahead of the main force on reconnaissance missions. Their small size made them hard to spot against the desert haze. They probed German defenses, reported enemy movements, and even extracted scout teams that had ventured too far behind enemy lines. In the fluid, mobile warfare of 1941 and 1942, the Universal Carrier was often more useful than vehicles costing 10 times as much. But what other roles did it play? The carrier also served a less celebrated but equally crucial function in North Africa: psychological warfare. Night raids by carrier-borne infantry became a specialty. A small group of carriers could move swiftly across the dark desert,
navigate by compass to within striking distance of an enemy position, and then deploy infantry for a rapid assault before melting back into the night. The speed of the withdrawal was the key to this tactic's success. Wheeled vehicles might get stuck in soft sand, but the carrier traversed it with ease. By the time the enemy could organize a response, the attackers were long gone. The Pacific Theater presented a completely different environment, and here the carrier demonstrated capabilities no one had anticipated. The jungles of Burma, with their dense vegetation and narrow trails, should have been a death trap for a small tracked vehicle. The monsoon season turned every path into a quagmire that swallowed wheeled trucks whole. Yet, the universal carrier, with its low ground pressure distributed over its tracks, could often navigate conditions that halted larger, heavier machines. British and Indian Army units in the Arakan campaigns used carriers to move supplies down jungle paths that Japanese believed were impassable for mechanized transport. This logistical advantage gave Allied commanders an operational flexibility that repeatedly caught Japanese defenders by surprise, as they had based their defenses on the assumption that certain approaches were secure from vehicle assault. The carrier proved them wrong. By the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, the Universal Carrier had been in constant production for 6 years, with a combat record spanning 3 continents. On the beaches of Normandy, it was present from the initial hours, landing with the first waves to haul heavy weapons, ammunition, and communications gear across terrain churned by fire and obstacles.
In the weeks that followed, as Allied forces battled their way through the dense Normandy hedgerows, the carriers participated in some of the most brutal and confined fighting of the war. The bocage landscape of Normandy, with its ancient sunken lanes bordered by high earth banks, was perfectly suited to neutralizing the advantages of large tanks. Tanks that were dominant in open fields became vulnerable in the bocage, unable to maneuver or see effectively, becoming easy prey for German anti-tank teams. The Universal Carrier, however, being small enough to navigate these tight lanes and low enough to be a minimal target, moved through the bocage with an agility that larger vehicles lacked. And it was here the Wasp Flamethrower variants proved so decisive against the fortified farmhouses and strongpoints that were costing the infantry so dearly. German soldiers who confronted the Wasp in Normandy described a unique kind of terror in their accounts. The psychological effect of the flamethrower was unlike any conventional weapon. It couldn't be dodged by taking cover. It sought out every crack and opening. The sound of the ignition system gave defenders only a second's warning before their position became an inferno. German units that had held their ground for hours against infantry and tanks sometimes broke and fled within minutes of a Wasp's arrival. This tactical reality was not overlooked by British commanders, who prioritized Wasp carriers for the toughest assaults throughout the Normandy campaign and the subsequent drive across Europe. The Soviet Union also received Universal Carriers via the Lend-Lease program, though in fewer numbers than other supplies. Soviet records are sparse, but they suggest the vehicles were used mostly for reconnaissance and command communications, where their mobility and low profile were highly valued on the Eastern Front. Soviet engineers who studied the carrier reportedly admired the simplicity of its forward engine, which could be maintained with common tools and skills. When compared to the American M3 half-track, the war's other main infantry carrier, the Universal Carrier held its own in several key areas. The half-track was bigger, carried more soldiers, and offered better protection, but it was also heavier, costlier, slower on soft ground, and much more maintenance-intensive. The carrier cost less than half as much to build as a half-track. It used less steel, less rubber, and less fuel, and could be repaired by mechanics with a fraction of the training. For an empire fighting a global war on a strained budget, these economic benefits directly created larger numbers, and larger numbers meant greater tactical flexibility for commanders. The production figures tell the most compelling part of the story. Of the 113,000-plus Universal Carriers constructed, Britain made around 37,000, Canada about 29,000, Australia roughly 5,000, with the rest coming from New Zealand and other Commonwealth nations. By comparison, the United States built approximately 68,000 M3 half-tracks in all versions. The carrier didn't just meet the half-track's output, it massively surpassed it. No other single armored vehicle from any nation even approached the Universal Carrier's production total. The fearsome Tiger tank, which looms large in the popular imagination of WW2 armor, numbered only around 1,347 examples. The Sherman tank, one of history's most produced tanks, reached about 50,000 units. The Universal Carrier outproduced the iconic Sherman by more than 2 to 1. It was produced in greater numbers than any other armored fighting vehicle ever built, by a margin that has never been challenged. How was this possible? Part of the answer lies in the factories themselves. They weren't specialized armament plants. They were ordinary metal workshops and automotive assembly lines converted for war production. A factory that made car doors in the 1930s could, with minimal changes, stamp out hull plates for a carrier. The Ford engine required no special manufacturing beyond what was already standard in the car industry. This meant that as the war placed ever-increasing demands on industry, the production base for the carrier could expand without competing for the same scarce resources needed for tanks and artillery. Every Tiger tank required the painstaking assembly of complex, high-tolerance components. Every Universal Carrier could be assembled by a trainee following a simple plan. That fundamental difference, multiplied over 6 years, is how you get to 113,000. After the war concluded in 1945, the carriers did not vanish. Armies that had received them continued to use them into the 1950s. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War saw carriers used by both sides. The Korean War saw them still serving with Commonwealth forces in its early stages. In the British Army, the Universal Carrier remained in active service through the 1950s, finally being retired from frontline duty around 1960, more than 20 years after the first ones rolled off the line. What gave the Universal Carrier such longevity? Beyond the sheer quantity that kept them in circulation, it was the fundamental rightness of its design philosophy. It was built around a realistic understanding of what infantry truly needed from a light armored vehicle, not an idealized fantasy. It moved men and materiel across ground that other vehicles couldn't. It did so with an engine any competent mechanic could fix and a layout simple enough for field repairs. It was neither glamorous nor intimidating. It didn't inspire awe like a tank. No one wrote epic poems about its firepower. It just performed, day after day, campaign after campaign, on every front where the Commonwealth armies fought. The engineer who pioneered the concept, John Valentine Carden, did not live to witness the full impact of his creation. He died in a plane crash in December 1935, before the Universal Carrier was even officially commissioned. His work was continued by others, but the core principles, the low-profile, open-top, civilian engine and modular design, were his. He had seen the problem of infantry support with a clarity that few others possessed, and he had devised an answer so fundamentally sound that the Army was still using it a quarter century after his death. That is a unique kind of legacy, where the inventor is gone long before his creation reaches its zenith. Today, military historians studying the logistics of the Second World War consistently arrive at the same conclusion about the carrier's record. Its contribution to Allied victory was not primarily about winning individual battles. It was operational. It kept infantry units supplied and mobile across terrain that other vehicles couldn't. It did so with an engine any competent mechanic could fix and a layout simple enough for field repairs. It was neither glamorous nor intimidating. It didn't inspire awe like a tank. No one wrote epic poems about its firepower. It just performed, day after day, campaign after campaign, on every front where the Commonwealth armies fought. The engineer who pioneered the concept, John Valentine Carden, did not live to witness the full impact of his creation. He died in a plane crash in December 1935, before the Universal Carrier was even officially commissioned. His work was continued by others, but the core principles, the low-profile, open-top, civilian engine and modular design, were his. He had seen the problem of infantry support with a clarity that few others possessed, and he had devised an answer so fundamentally sound that the Army was still using it a quarter century after his death. That is a unique kind of legacy, where the inventor is gone long before his creation reaches its zenith.
Today, military historians studying the logistics of the Second World War consistently arrive at the same conclusion about the carrier's record. Its contribution to Allied victory was not primarily about winning individual battles, it was operational. It kept infantry units supplied and mobile across terrain that other vehicles couldn't. It did so with an engine any competent mechanic could fix and a layout simple enough for field repairs. It was neither glamorous nor intimidating. It didn't inspire awe like a tank. No one wrote epic poems about its firepower. It just performed, day after day, campaign after campaign, on every front where the Commonwealth armies fought. The engineer who pioneered the concept, John Valentine Carden, did not live to witness the full impact of his creation. He died in a plane crash in December 1935, before the Universal Carrier was even officially commissioned. His work was continued by others, but the core principles, the low-profile, open-top, civilian engine and modular design, were his. He had seen the problem of infantry support with a clarity that few others possessed, and he had devised an answer so fundamentally sound that the Army was still using it a quarter century after his death. That is a unique kind of legacy, where the inventor is gone long before his creation reaches its zenith. Today, military historians studying the logistics of the Second World War consistently arrive at the same conclusion about the carrier's record. Its contribution to Allied victory was not primarily about winning individual battles, it was operational. It kept infantry units supplied and mobile across terrain that other vehicles couldn't. It did so with an engine any competent mechanic could fix and a layout simple enough for field repairs. It was neither glamorous nor intimidating. It didn't inspire awe like a tank. No one wrote epic poems about its firepower. It just performed, day after day, campaign after campaign, on every front where the Commonwealth armies fought. The engineer who pioneered the concept, John Valentine Carden, did not live to witness the full impact of his creation. He died in a plane crash in December 1935, before the Universal Carrier was even officially commissioned. His work was continued by others, but the core principles, the low-profile, open-top, civilian engine and modular design, were his. He had seen the problem of infantry support with a clarity that few others possessed, and he had devised an answer so fundamentally sound that the Army was still using it a quarter century after his death.